Welcome to No Clip, the podcast that's like a book club for people who don't think that books reward them enough for being good at them. I'm Chad Ruthermans.
And I'm Andy Kinnick.
And today, we're going to be talking about Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time. Again, it was developed by Ubisoft Montreal, published by Ubisoft, and was released in 2003 on the... I hate that you've listed this first. The Game Boy Advance, the PlayStation 2, the GameCube, Xbox, Windows, and mobile.
Mm-hmm.
I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe that the PS2, GameCube, Xbox titles came out first and then were ported to the other things.
I'm not sure. That's just the order they were listed on Wikipedia. But first, if you give us a like or a rating, it would be greatly appreciated.
So, the Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time is a platform game, but in the skin of an action-adventure game that it had killed and worn as a skin suit. And it is a spiritual follow-up to a game that was released on Apple II called Prince of Persia. And they have a very similar sort of design philosophy in terms of, like, how things... How it looks and, like, what you do in the game. To me, The Sands of Time, like the new Prince of Persia in 2003.
The reboot,
yeah,
you could call it.
It feels like a very realized version of taking that, like, old Macintosh cinematic platformer and turning it into what they thought, like, a modern audience would like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like it feels very much like I'd compare it to something like Uncharted. It almost feels like kind of like a predecessor to something like that, where it's very much trying to be like an action adventure movie as a game, and it seems like something that, like, I kind of wish there was more of. Like, one of my notes is like, remember when AAA games could be short?
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, I think this is, like, definitely feels like of its time because of it. Yeah, like the fact that it's, like, a 8-hour experience. I don't know. Something about that I really liked. It has, like, as I say over and over again, every time we do an older game I haven't done, there's a nostalgic feel to it.
Yeah.
Even though I never played it before. Yeah.
So, I actually had a few notes on sort of, like, design philosophy at the time, like, of the era of the PS2. And one of the things that we jokingly talk about, you've coined the term early 2000s forced variety.
Mm-hmm. You had to pay me every time you say it.
It's true. I have, like, a jar of quarters that I keep handing to him every time it comes up. We use it as a gag, sort of, to be like, look at how they made us do, like, a bullet hell segment in this game that has nothing to do with that.
Yeah, it was like a growing pain of video games.
Yeah, but it reflects a very real design trend of this era, and I think Prince of Persia might be, because we've talked about games from this era, but there are always things like Silent Hill 2, or, like, Devil May Cry, that are games that are outstanding.
Kingdom Hearts.
Yeah, Kingdom Hearts, because they focus on doing one thing really well. Devil May Cry is all about the combat system. Silent Hill 2 is all about atmosphere. This game seems to want to be about fucking everything. And it makes me really angry at it. Like... This is maybe the most disappointed that I've been in a game, which is a scale that I'm not used to using. Like, how high were my hopes compared to where I ended up? Because I usually go in pretty, like, blind. Like, I usually play these games and say, like, oh, whatever happens, happens, and I'll give, but this game has, like, a lot of build-up and stuff. It was really popular at the time when it came out. I owned a copy of it on the PlayStation 2, which we'll get into in a minute. Mm-hmm. And when I got here, and actually started playing it, I was like, man, they had something really interesting, and then they literally ruined it with everything else that they put in that didn't need to be there.
Yeah, I personally would say it falls somewhere in the middle ground between a focused game and a forced variety game, because I do feel like it does focus just on platforming, combat, and story. Like, you don't have like a Star Fox level or, or a swimming section or anything like that.
That is true.
So, but I agree. It does kind of like... It could have benefited from focusing just on the platforming, which is like its strongest, I think, aspect.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I do want to get into those kind of things, but I feel like that's going to make up a big meaty chunk of the discussion.
Those big meaty chunks.
Those meaty chunks. And the first thing that I do want to get out of the way, as a consumer report, if you're here for the should I purchase Prince of Persia from 2003 on this podcast in 2022. I read online that the PC port of this game is poo-poo bad port. That isn't any good. And I was like, well, thank God I have this working copy of it on the PlayStation 2. That was an overreach on my part. The copy that we had on the PlayStation 2, in fact, does not work. I sure thought that it would, because as far as I know, it was played once 10 years ago. More than 10 years ago at this point. 18 years ago. And not touched since, but I guess it has deteriorated in that time. So we ended up playing it on different things, and I just got a fancy new Steam Deck that I wanted to play it on because it was available and it would be convenient for me. The PC port is a poo-poo bad port that sucks. It would just unbind keys at random sometimes. There was a weird glitch that made me redo several portions of the game. So, all this to say, and it has no bearing on the quality of the game as intended, but don't play the PC version of the game if you can help it, because it's extremely bad.
Yeah, I played it on PS3.
And it was fine.
Yeah. Yeah, I assumed that it was the PlayStation 2 that wasn't working and not the disc.
I guess that could be.
I didn't test it.
Okay. We have a couple things that can play PS2 games.
That's true.
But none of them worked in my experience. So, who knows, really? Old hardware is difficult to work with sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that. Is there anything preliminary you wanted to get out before we start talking about jumping around?
Not really. I think we mostly covered it by just mentioning it. It's a spiritual like successor or like a reboot of a really, really old game from like the 80s. Notably,
the guy who coded and made the original Prince of Persia, his name is Jordan Mechner, that I just looked up. He actually did come back and led design on this game as well. And I'm not 100% sure what his involvement is in the franchise as it goes forward. I know that he actually had something to do with the movie that was made with Jake Gyllenhaal. But I don't know. It's a strange thing, especially considering how distant the releases were. It was like about 15 years between the two games, and for him to be the one to reboot it is actually kind of cool, and I think is why it sort of sticks with its roots as far as like how it looks and stuff goes.
Yeah, from what I know, Ubisoft bought the rights from whoever owned them at the time, and it ended up like in front of him because he had to like sign off on something in that deal. And he saw what they were working on because they had like a prototype before they offered to buy the IP, I think. And he liked what they made, so he was like, "Can I just work on this?" And they were like, "Yeah,
sure, why
come
not?"
on." So I think that is kind of an interesting story.
Yeah.
That he got kind of roped back in. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, very cool. That's one of the cool things about this game's setup, because the only other things about this game's setup are kind of Orientalist, so I would say not more Orientalist than something like Aladdin.
Yeah, it's definitely less than that.
Yeah, so it's probably, I mean, no amount is good, but I guess it's like fine in context of the time it came out. You know that no Iranian people actually worked on this game. It was made in Canada.
Yeah.
So like that sucks, but that's not really what we're here to talk about. And really the game doesn't seem to give one fuck at all about its own plot. It doesn't take great pains to present it to you.
Yeah, it feels very of the time in that way to me. It's like a very simple video game plot. That, you know, they didn't have a ton of money to put into cutscenes, so there aren't a bunch of them. Mm-hmm. You basically are just trying to... God, what even are you trying to do? I was going to say, it's like you like to save the princess and beat the bad guy. But you don't save the princess, but you do beat the bad guy.
You do beat the bad guy.
Who's just Jafar from Aladdin.
Yeah,
speaking of.
You steal...
You have the dagger of time.
Uh-huh.
And, you go ahead.
Yeah. Because what I did was I basically paid zero attention to the story as it was happening, and then I went back and just watched all the cutscenes. So my understanding of the plot is that you, under orders of the King of Persia, who would be your dad, go into this temple in India and raid it and steal a bunch of stuff. And there's this dude, the Vizier, who's the final boss of the game, and is an old man. Mm-hmm. And he's like, you can take all the cool treasure you want, except that dagger. That one's mine. That's for me. And so you go fetch the dagger by doing a bunch of cool platforming. And then you go and they try and steal the dagger, and they unleash sand people to attack you.
Yeah, it's like unleashing the sands of time or whatever, like, turns everyone into, like, sand zombies.
Yeah, who are not good or great. And so you are essentially, like, running around in the palace, sort of looking for him, but specifically looking for that big hourglass.
Yeah, which is in the highest room of the tallest tower.
Exactly. And then once you stab into the thing, you're able to go way back in time and try to prevent, essentially, the events of the game from happening. So the cool part about the story is that it's presented as you telling the story of the game to Farah, who is the, like, lead female protagonist, who is also in the game. So you're telling her stories of things that are going to happen to her, and so
or the things that did happen in the timeline,
right? That you are from
before you prevented it. Yeah,
right.
So yeah, it that framing device is something that feels really unique. That, along with the rewind mechanic, I think are two things that are like what make this game, or made it really popular at the time. Like, they're the things about it when you go back and play it, and you think like, oh, like, I feel like this game had a lot of ideas that were really ahead of their time, but I think all of it has like an of the time execution.
It sure does. It also looks good.
Yeah.
I think that I don't know if they up-resed the versions that we played.
Yeah, it's definitely a remaster.
Okay. I don't know about the PC port. Yeah, the PC port had some more questionable, at least UI looked really bad.
Yeah, it's called Prince of Persia HD, the version I played.
Yeah. I don't know if mine was or not. I don't remember seeing the word HD, but it probably was something. I don't know.
Yeah.
But either way, it does still look really good for the time. I think they did a good job of... I mean, everybody has these, like, ape arms that are, like, really long. But other than that, like, I think... And that's a stylistic decision, obviously. So, I don't know. I think it looks pretty decent for when it came out. Mm-hmm. And still holds up. Yeah. So... let's talk about the part of the game that is actually great. You kind of, like... You're introduced in what I think is a pretty cool opening sequence, like your tutorial area, in this, like, Indian palace where you're running around with a sword and you don't yet have the time rewind mechanic. And so it's all about just going checkpoint to checkpoint and it teaching you all of the different moves you can do in terms of platforming. And I feel like the way that everything's laid out, it feels really smooth. Once you get a hang of it, you can kind of blaze through some of, like, their little tutorial areas and it doesn't, like, hold you down. And I know this because I had to do it twice because PC port sucks. And I don't know, I really like it, and I feel like the actual, running on walls and jumping off is really smooth.
Yeah, the running on wall mechanic feels like like the whip from Castlevania or something to me, where it's something that feels really good to do, and it just seems like a big contribution to video games as a whole is that mechanic. Because like it feels like very much like it like passed the torch to Assassin's Creed. Feels like it's trying to do some similar things as this. I know the wall run and platforming mechanics from this are just straight up in Darksiders 2.
Oh yeah,
you have like the wall run and you can like jump and hang on ledges and stuff. So in et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure it's popped up in other things, but yeah, it's just such a cool, satisfying mechanic.
Yeah, and like I didn't go through a list of games and try and figure out like, is this the first thing that did a lot of this stuff? Because I don't honestly know. I know that there were lots of platformers that existed before this that had elements of this stuff, jumping between poles and doing like the spin around on a bar gymnastics move are definitely not unique to this at all. The licensed Spider-Man video game had swing on pole, so it's definitely not like everything the game did was unique, but I feel like it melded everything together really well, and it did. And I complained about this. I would like to point before I even say it. I do not think that Prince of Persia: The Sands of Time is a better game than Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. I will not say that. But one of the things that I noted in that game was that it was hard when playing to like see the line, like where you're supposed to go in a fluid way. And Prince of Persia is a 3D game that makes it very easy to see the line most of the time. There are definitely hiccups, but most of the time it is about your execution on the platforming, and that's what makes it engaging and actually fun to do.
Yeah, I think it accomplishes that in like two ways. Like one is the camera. It chooses to like take like a fixed perspective a lot of the time, which I hate. But just in general, not specifically in this game, but especially for a platformer. The other being, it's that everything, it's really video gamey. Like if you look playing it from like today's perspective, games go through so much effort to make them look more organic. And this is from a time where it's like, oh, you know, the stuff that like you can walk on looks this way, and the things that you can run on look a specific way. So it all looks more obvious to you at a glance. Yeah.
And then it's like, this is why you end up with things like, this is partially, I think, maybe why the era of the 3D platformer has sort of ended and is maybe being resurrected potentially. Because if you see modern 3D platformers, they are a lot more cartoony because you're able to do this kind of thing. When it was the hotness to make every game look as realistic as possible.
Like it still is.
Yeah, but especially in like the late PS3, early PS4
like
type generation.
When it was new.
Yeah, and it was like, oh, we can map somebody's face onto a 3D model.
It'll look great, you guys.
It'll look in 10 years from now. People will be like, wow, is that really Norman Reedus? No. That it was difficult to make a level like work. Like I talked about a million billion years ago, really liking the consistency in level design in Super Mario Sunshine, and I think a lot of that was born out of sort of a limitation. You couldn't make it look not like a video game. And this is kind of does the same thing. You know, the grayer bricks are ones that you can grab onto, stuff like that.
Yeah, and I really like, I think that stems into like the environment too. Like I like that you're going through just a castle for the whole time. Like, and I like it
doesn't look very much like a castle.
Yeah, I know, it doesn't look very much like a castle. This is long-time listeners will know.
It's the dumbest running joke of all time.
But yeah, I think it's similar to like something like Super Mario Sunshine. Like I like to see like how creative a developer can get, like within a limitation like that. Like Symphony of the Night is another game like that, where it's like all in one location, and it's like how do they get variety in areas? I think that's kind of cool. it highlights like the creative process, I think, in an interesting way. But I wanted to compare it to Eco.
Okay.
By Team Eco, which was a PS1 game, I think had an influence on this, because like you're going through a mostly abandoned castle with a companion character, and you're like solving puzzles and stuff. So I just felt like that seemed like not like a very specific source of influence, but I think might have been like a loose source of inspiration.
Yeah, I can kind of see it, especially in the like if you look at the original Prince of Persia and it coming from that, like, I mean, it's an Apple II game. It's a very early platformer type game, but it has the like trappings of a cinematic platformer. It's very fluid movement, and even though you're locked into what you can actually grab onto and do, they make an effort to make it look like that kind of a thing. And Eco is basically like a modern version of that kind of thing as well.
A 3D cinematic platformer.
Yeah, and Prince of Persia feels, the Sands of Time feels a lot like an implement or an iteration on that kind of thing. Eco was not wall running anywhere. Mm-hmm. He was mostly slowly walking along. But yeah, the feeling of it, I think, is kind of similar. It's just, I think the tone suffers from it being a much more cartoony game.
Sure.
But that's, I don't know. I don't think it was definitely not in Prince of Persia's design document to be like a moody, like, tone piece.
Yeah.
It wants to be like a bombastic action game.
Swashbuckling adventure.
Exactly.
But so, to get back to the platforming, I guess.
Yes.
I really liked when, like, puzzle solving involved the platforming. Like, there's a part really early on, which I thought was a really very bad sign, where you have this puzzle where you have to like turn a lever and to like two levers to like move these like cylinders around and like raise platforms to get them all into specific spots. And I was like, oh no, old PS2 game puzzle design. But that's really the only instance of a puzzle like that I can remember. Most of them involve like having to like get to a place.
Yeah, they used there were a lot of puzzles in this game in what a video game reviewer or player in 2003 would call puzzles. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that like if you broke them down into their constituent pieces, I don't know if they would fit the definition of puzzle, where it is just like you have to do a thing, but in order to do the thing, you have to do the platforming challenge to get there. And so it feels puzzle-like. You're collecting pieces, but they realistically are just traversal challenges.
Yeah, there's like micro puzzles within like a macro platforming challenge.
Yeah.
Like that room you were watching me play with all of the ropes. Like, there are some parts we had to, like, move a box to a spot, you know, a classic video game, drag the box around.
Yeah.
And there might be a time where you had to, like, swing to a spot you didn't think you were going to need to swing to, but mostly you're just platforming.
Yeah.
Like, a little bit of puzzly moments thrown in.
Yeah, I think when the game does something that is purely a puzzle, it's always a bad puzzle.
Yeah.
Like, it never quite makes a puzzle that's, like, really good. There are several that involved, like, turning levers, like, a specific amount, or, like, to face in a direction, and then you do a thing. Mm-hmm. And never once did I really ever have to think about it. I mostly solved them accidentally.
Yeah. Move these mirrors around to reflect the light.
That's on the ground.
Yeah, that's marked on the spot.
And so that all, like, it's one of those things you always talk about it. So I always attribute it to you, of saying, like, if you can put like a little bit of a puzzle, something to make the player think a little bit, then it's appreciated. But it is possible to go too far.
Yeah.
And I think that this is an example of it. Like, there's parts of it where I see it totally being just a thing. Like, you get here and you grab those little bars that you grab onto and they open doors. Love those.
Yeah.
Very elegant design. You grab the thing, you see that you've completed the thing, now you can move on from the room.
I like the buttons that you have to hit by running up the wall.
Those are satisfying.
Yeah, like what's his name, who used to be Dan something from Extra Credits,
Oh,
who he
yeah.
has not been a part of for many years, did a video about like how just like a character's animations can like say a lot about their personality, like something about just how like they open a box or they push a button and things like that. And the way that he pushes buttons by having to like run up a wall and hit them with his feet just seems like a really clever way to be like, oh well, push the button will have the character do the platformy thing. Just seemed like a good like way to map the gameplay mechanics and the personality of the character, like tie them together.
Yeah, and it keeps you moving.
Yeah.
Like, it's the thing, you know the game is about movement, so...
Yeah, it's fun to run on a wall, so why not push a button while running on a wall?
And you can, like, time your jump with when you hit the button, which I think is actually a part of some of the puzzles. It's a lot of the level design, I think, is genuinely really good. I think that they spent a lot of time to make sure that, like, all of the jumps look mostly... There's that one instance of that fucking rope room where it's like, gotta jump over to that rope on the left, and it's like, are you sure? Because it sure looks way too far
looks
away.
like it's a football field away.
But you sure can do it. Even though there are platforms right next to you that you could jump on easily and look like places you could go. But those aren't right. And they make you restart the whole puzzle if you jump to them. So with some hiccups like that one, most of the level design I think is really good. And we should talk about it. You can rewind the time. Ooh, Halloween.
Not yet. We're getting there.
All right, sorry. Cut the Halloween part. I like the implementation of the rewind mechanic. To an extent, it has kind of a what is the point of the limited number of rewinds problem, where you're like, if I'm just doing platforming, shouldn't I just be able to do this or whatever?
I don't know. I feel like it adds like some stakes. Like you don't just feel like you can mess up infinitely.
That is sort of true.
Yeah.
I think it has this weird way of being both like the way that I would design a platformer with a time rewind mechanic is not unique. This has been done already. I think we've played games like, I think Braid,
yeah,
that's the game, similar to this. Make the platforming challenges, well, okay, Braid's more of a puzzle game, but like, ignore that. If you make the platforming challenges more difficult, and then you can rewind to redo parts of them, it makes the game feel a little bit more fast-paced. It allows you to trial and error a lot of stuff. The way that this game does it, most of the platforming stuff is pretty doable. And you really only get, like, stuck in ways where you're actually rewinding a lot in timing-based stuff. So it doesn't... I don't know. I like the implementation, but also I wish that it was a little snappier, and that's why I don't really like the limited rewinds for platforming segments, because it just feels like you're just, I don't know. A lot of the time it's just like, I'll just die, and I won't even go back that far. It's like not that important.
I don't know. I feel like I like it being a manageable resource. Like I think it adds like decision making. Like you're saying, like, do I rewind it and waste a tank, or do I just start over from the checkpoint? And it's like the one thing I'd like about the combat system is that like the dagger and like having to like stab the enemies, I think adds like decision making to like I had to plan out when I do this. So I think that's interesting. And I agree I could be snappier. They have to like leave a bunch of time after you die to give you enough time to like hit the rewind button, and that always feels really janky and awkward.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Yeah, I feel like it does add like some necessary like pressure to like perform and everything. I know like my go-to example for this is something like Guacamelee. There's almost no punishment for dying. Like you fall off a ledge into lava and you just instantly are back on the platform.
Yeah.
And it just feels like nothing. So I think you need like a little bit of like to sell the failure state.
Right. Yeah, and the fact that this game has like a heavily mitigated failure state, I guess. I can kind of get behind that. I just think that there's something about it that feels a little bit too over-designed or like a little sluggish.
Yeah.
That makes it hard to engage with in a way that I want to.
Yeah, it could definitely be improved on. There might be something that has done this, but like I couldn't think of it off the top of my head. But it just seems like such a great idea. I know something like Ori lets you do like create your own checkpoints, and it has like the launch mechanic that like lets you kind of correct your platforming, or the flood. Once again, Mario Sunshine.
Yeah, great game.
People tend to like those kinds of things, and it seems like the rewind mechanic specifically. I don't know if they've patented it or something, but like something that like another game would have tried to do and like refine that I don't, as far as I'm aware, hasn't really been done.
I mean, I don't think it has been really in 3D platformers. I'll say I'll do it on the break, which means we won't do it.
Yeah.
But I believe that there are some like indie platformers that use this mechanic.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah. And I know that it has been iterated on at some point, but I would have to actually look into it because I don't necessarily know that I've played any of them. So there is that. I want to shout out one thing, because we've got a little bit of time, and there's something I want to yell at for a second before we go to break.
Yes.
But I do want to shout out something that I like about this that I never thought that I would, and that this is a platformer that has even worse than real life fall damage. If you fall 1 inch past the fall damage thing, you just fucking collapse in a pile and are like, oh no. And it's obviously used, this is a potential limitation of the time of how this is like all worked out, but it's obviously implemented that way so that you have to do the puzzles the way that, or the platforming challenges in the way that they've prescribed them. But I actually love it conceptually because it makes getting down from places a thing. In a platformer, a lot of the time you jump up real high and then you have to go back down and you just jump off and you land in your, maybe you take a little bit of damage. Mario does this, like you'll take like 3 points of damage or something.
Yeah.
And so I liked that because it sings in a level that I otherwise fucking hate. In the library area, there's you climb up and then you like are platforming across the scaffolding, but then in order to leave the level, you actually have to come back to the ground. And so you have to plot a route that actually takes you back to ground level or low enough that you can jump down there without dying. And it made me think about it and go like, oh yeah, there's actually a lot of that in this game. There's a lot of places where you can see your goal. It's easily accessible via falling, but unfortunately your life will leave you if you do that. So you do their prescribed platforming challenge, but the idea is still there. It's something I do like and I think is a cool thing that you just don't see as often.
Yeah, and you can even like downwards wall jump too, which I thought was interesting. No, I agree. It definitely it does feel really silly. There were some parts earlier on where there's just ground below and you try to jump down to it and it's like maybe a 6-foot drop, and he just dies immediately, as if he plummeted to his death. And it is, it's very awkward. I think there's less of that the further in you go, because there's like larger gaps and stuff you had to platform across. It does feel really clever. It's almost like not quite doubling your platforming space, but it's definitely like adding a lot of extra stuff. Yeah.
It's cool like that. The prince is just a very fragile man.
Yeah.
He can die from any drop.
He's agile, not strong.
Yeah.
It's all in his fingers. That's where all his strength is.
God, he's got such finger strength too. This man. That actually also leads into what I was going to say.
My God.
We've been really positive. We have not been really positive, but we have been reasonably positive about this game that in the end I don't like all that much. So I do want to, before
I thought you were going to be teeming with hatred when I was playing it.
I was not teeming. I was teeming with disappointment. But I do want to talk about this because this is an element of I'm considering it an element of platforming. No one in their right mind would, but I am for some reason. Because frequently you will just be stopped in the middle of platforming by, ooh, surprise, bats! Ooh, a flock of bats just will fly in.
You know I'm going to agree with this.
Yeah.
You agree with this?
Do you agree with this? So, while the prince is hanging from somewhere, and you'll sort of, like, make your way across stuff, and then just bats show up, and if the bats attack you, they don't do very much damage, but they will knock you off of whatever you're standing on, potentially killing you and making you reset. So what you do is you press the attack button for a while, and I would just put the controller on a table and tap on the attack button and, like, look at my phone or, like, check my email, make sure everything's good in, like, the world around me and my physical vicinity. Because the bats are not a challenge. I guess if you wanted to kill them faster, you could time your swings.
The thing you're supposed to do is if you don't attack them, they come in closer to you. And then if you attack when they're, like, all in close, you can hit, like, 3 of them at a time. Then they disperse, and then they come back, and then you hit them again.
Yeah, and you have to get it down to there only being, like, 3 bats.
I think it's 3, and then they'll fly away.
Yeah. But I found that occasionally did make me still get hit. So I found that the optimal thing,
too slow.
Yeah, the optimal thing to do was just to press the X button. And allow me to get a drink of water, stay hydrated, it's important. And so it's not, even if you do try and do it the fast way, right? It isn't engaging. It's not like nobody went, hooray, the bats are here. I love these guys. It just seems like a big speed bump for fun, where you're like, oh, I'm having fun. One of my favorite parts of the whole game is the very end where you don't have the dagger and you just have to climb up the big tower. I thought the platforming design was really on point there. It didn't stop you a million times to do stupid combat, and when it did, you had the one-hit kill sword. Well, we'll get back to that on the second half. But just bats everywhere. There's just bats fucking all over the place, and it drives me insane. What do you think about bats?
I mean, I don't like them either. I think this is another, like, older game thing, especially with things like enemy designs. Like, there's oftentimes there'll just be something in there that seems like it is just supposed to be annoying. For one reason or another. I don't know. If the logic is supposed to be like, oh, those players think they're getting so good, and we're going to throw them a curveball. They're going to have to deal with this. I don't know. Yeah, it might be a holdover from arcadey design. I don't know. But yeah, no, it's just an annoyance.
Yeah, it's an annoyance and a time waster, and it just feels like really uncalled for in all elements of design. It's like nobody would have sat and planned that out. That had to have come in, like, midway through design, right? Like, nobody's like, oh, we're going to do this, and then some bats will show up and make them stop for a while. It's like, you look at the rest of the design. You remember the big cave area with the waterfall?
Oh, yeah.
You, like, run across the wall, and you jump in between the stalactites, and you get onto the thing, go across the bridge crumbles. Like, I can imagine somebody dreaming that up and putting it in, like, an adventure novel. He jumped across 2 stalactites, ran across the wall, and jumped onto the crumbling bridge, all for love, or whatever the fuck he's after. And at no point in that are you like, and then some bats showed up, and the prince hung, and he swung his sword at him for, like, 15, 20 seconds. And then he ran across another wall and jumped onto another slide. Like, it's not exciting. Nobody would put it in from a design standpoint. It had to have been somebody like... I feel like this game was pranked in development.
It seems like, to me, like, it's like the birds as well. They're like, we can't have like enemy encounters while platforming, so like we want to introduce some external source of tension, you know, like something that could fuck you up and make you fall, I guess, would be the logic there.
Yeah.
I assume.
Yeah, I can see why they're implemented. The birds, I think, are better, though, because they're more of a timing thing.
Yeah.
I guess the bats are also a timing thing. But then why even have the bats? Why not just have birds always? I don't know. And the birds only have to hit them one fucking time.
Yeah.
Alright. I'm done fighting about these bats.
Uh-huh.
So let's fight all of the other enemies in the game after the break.
Flip over their heads and stuff.
Welcome back. We are now going to talk about all of the parts of the game that are not the platforming.
Uh-huh.
And spoiler alert, I don't like them. I wish they didn't have them. Let me just get my thesis statement out of the way real quick.
Sure.
The combat in this game is bad. It's extremely bad. It's boring. It's not hard, but it is punishing. And every fight takes 4 times longer than it needs to. That's basically where I landed. And I came up with that rubric, 4 times longer, pretty early on.
Uh-huh.
And then as the game went on, it just kept proving me more and more right. That the combat would just keep going forever. And it really felt awful to do. I don't know if you agree, but I refuse to believe that anyone thinks that it's like good combat.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's like fine at best. I think I feel like it has like some interesting ideas. Like I said on the first half, like I do kind of like the way that the dagger is actually factored into it, and you can like stun people in time, and then like they get knocked down, and you have to like time out when you stab them to kill them, to try and not get hit by somebody else. Like I think that's all like good on paper, but I agree a lot of the time the fights go on way too long. And I don't know. I think it's like, and I think for the time especially, like it's okay. Because like there really weren't a lot of games like, you know, other than like something like Devil May Cry or like Kingdom Hearts or like early like action hack and slashy kind of games. Like most games had bad combat, and that's true of a lot of games even to this day. If they aren't combat games, the combat's usually pretty meh. So it didn't stand out to me as like uniquely terrible, but I thought it was like okay when it was working at its best, and yeah, a lot of the times it was pretty lackluster.
Yeah, and it doesn't take a long meandering path to get to the heart of the problem, really. You just said it right there. It's like other games at the time where the combat was actually good are games that focused on combat. They were games that were about their combat. Devil May Cry is about fighting. Mm-hmm.
It's like, yeah, the go-to standard for the time period.
Yeah. Kingdom Hearts is an RPG, but it's an action RPG, and it was one of the first games that Square made that really wanted to focus on a more active combat system. And you can tell they didn't want to fuck it up because they thought they really had something, and it turns out, haha, here we are 20 years later still doing the same shit.
There was also platforming in Kingdom Hearts.
There's also, but the platform in Kingdom Hearts sucks
but
ass.
the platforming is the part that sucks, and not the combat. So Prince of Persia put its efforts in its platforming. That's where the effort should have gone. But it's like if you were given a book report on 2 books, and you just didn't read one. And it was called A Tale of Two Cities.
It was A Tale of Two Cities. and you just didn't read one of the books. And so you were like writing the paper, and you were like, I should give equal focus to the book that I have no idea what I'm doing on. It feels misguided, the fact that they put so much of it in the game when it clearly isn't their focus. Maybe the animators really liked all of the jumpy flips that they could make the prince do, and they didn't want to waste those animations, but there's really no excuse for just how long combat takes in this game.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's in there because of the whole action adventure movie sort of angle, swashbuckling, style thing that they're going for. And I do actually think that the game is paced out pretty well. I feel like there's usually a good amount of platforming, story in combat. I think it kind of bounces between them at a good pace. But I think the biggest problem, is just how long the combat encounters last. If they were shorter and snappier, I think it would be a lot better.
Yeah. Well, okay. I may have a decidedly more extreme opinion on this.
Oh, yeah.
Because I never really considered the pacing so much, because I felt like the pacing of the game ground to an immediate halt every time that I had to pull the sword out.
Sure.
And there are times when it's glaringly obvious that is the case. Hence, bats. Because you're literally stopped from doing a thing that you want to do to swing a sword at bats. But the more nefarious version of it is the fact that, you finish a platforming segment and it goes into the combat section, and it's I see on paper, you did a big platforming challenge that had, a good arc of, easy to challenging, whatever. You did a whole room and it felt good to do, except for when they were bats. And then you get out of it, and it's just now it's time for the combat part. And if you were enjoying all the parts, you would go, yes, that makes sense. Time for the combat part. Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a save in between or something.
Yeah.
But I would get to that combat part and I would go,
turn the game off.
And I never did that. In fact, I felt like I needed to muscle through the combat in order to, before I quit. Otherwise, the next time I turned the game on, I'd probably want to turn it right back off. I really dislike the combat in this game a lot. It's very mashy, and it's not mashy in the fun way, where you feel like all of your attacks are doing something, because the enemies just block, and from what I can tell, they just block kind of at random. I will attack. There are certain openings, obviously, that you can always land attacks on. If they do a big ground slam move and you hit them, you'll get it. But, you attack somebody who is not looking at you, facing entirely the opposite direction, and they'll just be bunk, and just deflect your attack. And that just feels like shit. Anytime, in any game, pretty much, getting your attack blocked, because it's an indication that you did something wrong. I guess, not in a game like Sekiro, where, it's about putting pressure on it, but we're going to ignore that because it's obviously an outstanding example. It makes the combat feel like it is being... It's like dragging your feet through a 10-foot deep sludge pool at all times. You can do cool acrobatics and shit, but you never feel like you're making progress in it. And actually, I have a totally other thing to say if you have.
I think that I think it's just the AI is hard. It's unreadable. I think is the thing. It's you don't know, when an enemy is guarding, or when it's gonna attack. A lot of times they just stand around, but then other times you'll get knocked down and they'll all wail on you. So you can't pay attention to what the enemies are doing and react accordingly. Really, you just kind of have to. It's more reactive.
Yeah.
If you see something coming, then you avoid it. And I guess I feel your larger point, I feel like the actual combat encounters maybe make up 15% of the game. But it feels like a lot more than that because they're so long.
Yeah.
So I definitely sympathize. So those are the two things I had. If you want to launch into your other thing.
My other thing is that it is a very no-brain, stupid design decision to have the enemies be able to teleport. I get that they wanted to make them slow and to not like lock you into a small room with them, which is what other games would do in a similar situation. But it means that your positioning also means nothing, except be away from Farah, because she's the archer and she can die. She can also, another thing, a cool idea that gets lost in that muck puddle I was talking about is that you can hurt Farah, and Farah can shoot you with arrows, and the enemies can hurt each other.
Yeah, there's friendly fire.
Yeah, fully applied to everybody. And I like the idea, but once again, I feel like the game doesn't take any advantage of it whatsoever. Outside of, I guess, the rewind mechanic, it does give an additional use if you accidentally take an arrow to the knee and have to go back in time to not die. But the fact that enemies can teleport fucking blows, because you're like, oh, there's enemies here, and so I'll move over to here to try and get like one guy by himself, because that's when the combat is manageable. And then everyone just teleports over to you. And 99% of the enemies you can't do the jump attack over top of. All the arenas are really huge. Mostly there are a few cramped ones, which I think are a little bit more interesting because you can do the wall run stuff. But most of them are big, wide open arenas with nothing to jump off of. So you end up just kind of like standing still, holding the block button unless they go for a sweep attack, taking damage and rewinding time. There's also a really dumb mechanic where after you retrieve, like once you stab someone with the dagger, then it resets your time circle that's in the top left. And so if you die immediately after that, you just fucking are dead and have to restart the whole encounter. I don't know. It's just, like I said, it's not hard because it's all just like, you never have to do anything that's complicated. You just have to press the attack button and then choose the one interesting decision. When do I stab this downed guy? Or when do I use one of my powers? But you just have to hold tight for a long time while nothing happens around you. It feels like you can't be proactive, like you said. It's a reactive thing. But then also playing defensively is not making any progress, because they'll just walk slowly in a circle around you, or teleport, or go attack your ally, who also loses you the game if she dies. So it just felt like I never knew how to play it. The game never explained to me a way to play it that I found actually engaging. It just seemed like they kept throwing things at you, and so I would just hit the attack button a lot of times, and eventually it would just triumph. I don't know. I hated literally every second of it. I don't think I enjoyed myself for a fraction of a tiny bit of time during those long ass combat encounters.
I definitely agree that the teleporting is terrible.
Yeah.
Especially because, like, it has a hurt box. Like, an enemy teleporting in near you will, like, knock you over. That's especially dumb. Yeah, and it just feels like they tried, like, I feel like, they're trying to create, like, an interesting combat system, and, like, for the time, like, I don't know how it was received. But, yeah, it's not aged well. It almost seems like a precursor to, like, Arkham Asylum combat or something, which also isn't good. But
and that was highly praised when it came out, like, its combat system specifically.
So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, they tried. I just think, like, other elements of this game, like, I feel like I probably would have liked it at the time, but, like, it's just not aged well at all. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how I wish I had played it whenever we got it when I was a kid, but it was not played by me. It was played by other members of my household. So
Your mom?
My mom was getting down with some Prince of Persia. Yeah. She liked the weird sex scene at the middle.
Nice.
That was your favorite part. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like as a kid, I wouldn't have had the patience for it, because as an adult, I barely have the patience for it. So, I'm not sure. I just don't know. That platform is good, though, you know?
So I guess, like, speaking of the combat and the platforming, not too long before this video's coming out, a YouTuber by the name of Matthew Matosis released a video, first one he'd done in like a year or plus, on context sensitivity in video games. And it was something I could not think a lot about while playing this after watching that video, because it is context sensitivity, the video game. It is something I kind of wanted to briefly touch on, because I'm not like super knowledgeable about game development and everything. But like, basically context sensitivity, if you don't know, is like when you're like near a wall, you can hit the R1 button to run along it, like when you're near a gap. But when you're not doing that, if you're just standing there, the R1 button doesn't do anything. So yeah, most things in this game work like that.
Yeah.
And it's probably was that and like the fixed camera were probably like my two biggest sources of friction with it. You were watching me play that library part, which I think, with a few things like tweaked about the gameplay, would have been like one of the best areas of the game. But like there was like especially that one part that really is emblematic of it for me, where you had to like run up the wall to hit the button, and it made the part of the bookcase come out, and then like you had to like run over to the right to get the camera to reset to the angle so you could actually see what you wanted to. And like the angle you were going, like you would like accidentally run on the wall instead of running up the wall, and like it was just like everything is fighting against you doing that part correctly.
Yeah.
And like that just really highlights like when the game, like fixed camera can work really well in some parts. Like I get what they're going for. They're doing a 3D platformer. Everyone, even if it's a good camera and a 3D platformer, people will still complain about cameras and 3D platformers. So they're trying to like solve a problem. But like, you know, it's like too rigid, and then like it wants to give you control a little, but then it snaps back, so it almost makes you more mad because it's like the illusion of control, but you don't really have any. But yeah, there's just like a lot of things like that really highlights when it doesn't work, it feels really bad. And like I think, in my opinion, that's probably the biggest thing that makes this game feel like aged. Yeah.
I think there's a couple of things with that. The first thing I want to mention is that I didn't say this when you were playing it because I didn't want to, like, I don't know, jump in. If I had known what an effect it would have had on your opinion of the area, maybe I would have. But you actually could have done that jump by just jumping off of the button. You jump directly onto the bookcase, and you just wall jump up that way.
But well, once again, the camera.
Yeah, it does highlight the camera thing, because
I'd never even considered doing that because I couldn't see
where the bookcase was.
Yeah.
But I will shout out that I actually noted that I like the camera in this game, but I think it is two things. I think
there's times when it works,
yeah,
but a lot where it doesn't.
I think that it's very intentionally designed. You can tell because it does go to the fixed angles, but then, and that I think does work. A lot of the times when it does snap to a fixed angle, it is legitimately to give you a better view of what's going on. That big cave section is, I think, a good example of it, because it does follow you and never leaves your next jump out of frame, as it could if you were the one controlling the camera. The other thing, though, and this is a coincidence, and I didn't realize until like halfway through the game exactly what had happened. As I've mentioned previously, the PC port of the game is a doo-doo port that is bad. But in order to make the menus usable at all with a controller, I had to turn the right stick sensitivity down to like -1 billion. Otherwise you would just way overshoot all of the menu options, and it would be frustrating to even like hit the continue button. So I didn't realize that the byproduct of that is that my camera movements were glacially slow. And it actually, I think, helped because it made it so that, like, I was mostly using the camera angle that the game set up for me and was not, like, spinning all around. I complained about me doing this in Mario 3D World. Because if you go off of, like, what they intend, you're not doing the game correctly.
Yeah. See, for me, though, like 3D World, it's consistent.
Yeah.
So, like, I never felt, like, the temptation to even try to move the camera in that. Because it kind of felt more like a 2D thing, a view on a 3D space, if that makes any sense. With this, though, like, my problem is, like, there are parts where you do just have control of the camera and parts where you don't. And, like, the going back and forth, like, really, like, grated on me.
Yeah, and I actually just completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Because, once again, I mean, 3D World, not even really fair. The game came out, like, 12 years after this one did. But, yeah, it's a different thing. And this game's camera isn't the best. But I thought that it was good for the time.
It is a good solution. I think, like I said about, like, the combat, is like, I feel like they tried. Like, they were really trying to, like, get ahead of, like, they were forward thinking.
Yeah.
They're trying to get ahead of, like, because it's early days for 3D platformers in 2003. So they were, like, trying to, like, come up with a solution to a problem.
The Prince of Persia sans of they tried. Yeah, but no, I think that's all a good thing to bring up. There's going to be different points of friction, I think, for different people. I would love to say that the combat is going to be a point of friction to everybody, but I don't actually know how true that is.
It didn't bother me nearly as much as you.
I mean,
I can't say it added to the game.
No, it really
but like
doesn't.
I wasn't mad every time I got to one. So I fall somewhere between those two things.
I think, because we talked about the pacing and stuff, and it's like, because to me, I feel like the pacing of the game would have been better if every time there was combat, they just fucking cut and paste and put it in the trash. Because, like, you could just go from platforming bit to platforming bit, and the game wouldn't change at all until you get to the final boss and go, like, well, it's weird that nothing happened and then the credits rolled. But, like, pretty much just deleting every part of the combat in the game, I think it would have had a positive effect on the game for me. Like, not even designing around the game not having combat, just literally taking it out. Like, scarabs, they are nothing. Oh God.
Yeah, that was dumb.
It's a nothing enemy.
Fodder enemy.
Yeah. It presents no challenge at all. I think I was hit by one once in the entire duration of my playtime, and all it does is it makes you stop, swing your sword a couple times, and then plays a cutscene of you putting your sword away to indicate that the enemies are gone. It's so bad.
I like that I just offhandedly mentioned combat again, and you took that opportunity to complain about it some more.
It was already in the forefront of my mind because you were talking about the library part, and I was like, "Yeah, that could have been
combat.
That could have been a good part, except it starts with combat.
It does start with combat. It just goes on so long. I forgot.
Yeah, there's a lot in between.
Well, given that you hated combat, I wanted to talk about the fact that this game doesn't have any boss fights except the final boss.
Yeah, I do too.
And I just thought that was an interesting decision. Like, I kept expecting one, you know? Like, as I was going through, I was like, oh, okay, like, I do this part, and then there's a save point. I'm like, oh, is there going to be a boss fight after this? And there just isn't one. But I was just thinking, as you were complaining, it could have been, like, a cool approach to have no combat, but then have, like, a couple of bosses instead for your combat fix. And, like, you could, like, ones that you incorporate the platforming into more, like, maybe you have to, like, run up on its back and stab it and stuff. Something like that could have been cool.
Hey, I'm me, and you are a developer of Prince of Persia in 2003.
Okay, all right. I'm ready for this role play.
All right, here you go.
All right, come into my office.
Oh, hey.
I understand you had something you wanted to tell me.
Yeah, I had some ideas about the new game that we're working on. 2003 is right around the corner. We got to get something out for the PS2. For Q.
I know, the shipping date is just it's breathing down my neck.
I know we weren't going to do boss fights, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you did load the game up with all this shitty combat that sucks.
Uh-huh. Hey.
What about...
You're fine.
And scene.
Only team players on...
at Ubisoft Montreal. Yeah. What if we have a boss fight that uses the unique mechanics of the game, the way that boss fights are uniquely capable of doing? Because like in the combat right now, you can do the rewind time, but really you just do it to erase damage that you take and nothing else. What if you had like a boss that's like a big sand golem or something, and he would smash his hand down real fast, but you would see where he smashed his hand down, so you rewind time to get out of the way and land an attack when the hand comes down, right? That'd be genius, wouldn't it? It would be a good use of the mechanic. It wouldn't be traditional, weird, mashy combat, and you could incorporate big monsters, which everybody likes.
I mean, Sony's breathing down my neck. We got to ship this game by Q1 next year. All right.
Yeah. No. Okay. Scene. I genuinely think that this, because there's this mechanic, this time reversal mechanic, boss fights actually would have been cool in this game. I don't even really like boss fights that much generally, but this seems like the kind of place where they could be put to good use.
Yeah, just like a handful, I think. Yeah, like maybe 4 or so, like big ones.
Yeah.
Like a sand golem.
Like a big sand golem.
Yeah.
That's just what I thought.
Like a big snake.
Could be like a big snake.
Yeah, go with more Aladdin inspiration.
Yeah, anything at all that could utilize the time reversal in a way that was like interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that's another way that I think this is more like very like 2003 PS2 kind of design. Like if you had the time rewind mechanic in a newer game, there would be more of a push to do creative things with it, whereas like at the time it was like it's the rewind mechanic, you use it to reverse, there's just the one use.
Yeah,
like combat and platforming mistakes.
Yeah the rewind is, if we talked about this in combat, it doesn't feel very proactive. The rewind is not proactive. You can't use the rewind to solve a problem.
Yeah. It's not like a puzzle element.
Yeah, it's only there to erase your errors. And I don't know, could have been cool.
So another thing I wanted to mention was Farah herself. We kind of talked about her a little bit. I guess, what did you think of her? Like, because I actually really liked the inclusion of the character. Because she's mostly just for presentation. Like, she assists you in combat, but like, I found that like if you just kind of like move near her every once in a while, like she will never die. Like things will just aggro to you, so she's not like a liability in an annoying way. And, like, I like their banter, and I like how like, even though it's not actually adding anything mechanically, like I like it when you have to rely on her to help solve a puzzle. Like I think it's cute. Like, I just think, like, presentation-wise, I think, like, it adds a fun element to the game.
Yeah, I think as far as companion mechanics go in games, I think that this is a decent one. I think that her application in combat is legitimately good. It's one of the few unambiguously good things about the combat.
I sucked ass at fighting the birds.
Oh, yeah?
So you can just stand back and let her shoot them.
That is true.
Yeah, so that was actually pretty sweet.
I would just block and then attack after they hit me like a dog in Dark
I almost
Souls.
Never blocked. I was always just kind of like running around like an idiot.
Oh, aggro-kinic.
Aggro-kinic, yeah. So I just legitimately never thought to even block the crows for some reason. It's like you block other weapons with the block attack. Right?
I mean, it is true. You do that.
Yeah, so that's definitely my thought on that one.
But otherwise, I mean, I didn't like the banter. I didn't really like their relationship very much.
See, I thought the dialogue was like of the time, like very cheesy and bad. But like I thought their back and forth was like amusing.
Yeah, I probably would, because the cutscene compilation on YouTube I watched did not include and as I complained to you about, the audio is mixed in a confusingly bad way.
That is something we should legitimately mention. I think you thought it might have just been the PC port, but it's like that on the PS3 as well. And I assume in the original game, maybe it's better in the original.
Could be. But yeah, you can't hear her most of the time.
In
and
the
then your
cutscenes.
character is piercingly loud.
Oh yeah, in the gameplay, but it's even worse in the cutscenes. Like the voices are like almost inaudible in the cutscenes.
It's really strange that is the case. And the fact that it happened on both versions means that it wasn't just like a weird technical issue.
Makes me think the original's like that too.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that might have something to do with it. I never really got connected to her character from a gameplay perspective. I just kept thinking, like, man, how much smaller is Farah than your character, realistically?
Oh, that she can fit through cracks.
She's been through every crack in the thing. I mean, she has 2003 PlayStation 2 era big ass, big tits, and just squeezes right into those cracks, no problem. Much like the Prince squeeze. Never mind. Going on.
And I, once again, don't remember the story super well because it was hard to hear. But
what a weird fucking thing. They were like, oh, the story of the game. Not really sure. It was difficult to listen to.
It's true, though.
It is true.
I was actually, like, the part of the story I found the most interesting is, like, she, like, splits off to do kind of her own thing towards the end and tries to, like, she, like, takes the dagger from you at one point. And then you end up going into, like, this weird dream sequence, which, like, I think it, like, implies that she's, like, related to this goddess character. I thought that was all really interesting, but it doesn't really go anywhere.
Yeah. There's a bunch of stuff.
And I know she isn't in the sequel.
Right.
But then they bring her back in the third one.
I didn't know there was a third one.
Yeah, there's a trilogy.
Is the third one The Warrior Within? Or is that the second one? Don't think too hard about it.
I'm not going to try too hard.
I'm only aware of the one other one.
Sure, yeah. There was a trilogy on this console generation.
A classic console generation for trilogies.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that, like, I say all these words that sound inflammatory, but I don't actually, like, hate the character. Like I said, I think mechanically she actually does a lot to help the game. I think it both gives you an indication of where you're supposed to go in terms of actual pathfinding in the platforming parts, and her contribution in combat actually is felt. Especially given that they just are always 4 enemies attacking you. The fact that she can just disable somebody is really nice.
Yeah.
But as far as like I was kind of dismissive of the plot.
Sure, yeah, that's totally fair.
Yeah, and I still am.
Yeah, and I was too. Like that was like the one part. Like we were in the weird dream space with like the Lost Woods puzzle.
Oh no.
Yeah. I was like, I was actually like interested in what the story was doing, but then it just doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah. Just like briefly, because we really don't need to go over it.
Uh-huh.
The Lost Woods puzzle in this game fucking sucks.
Yeah, well, if you're watching on YouTube, I won't cut it out. You can watch me struggle with it and then look up what to do. Because this is like a classic puzzle moment. And we do a lot of games on the podcast. Like I always was kind of bad at puzzle games, like Zelda games. I love them. But, like, I would often get stuck in, like, a Zelda dungeon. And I've gotten a lot better at puzzle solving, but it's, like, it's really hard when you sit down and think about it. Because there will be a puzzle that, in retrospect, you'll think is really awesome and clever and cool. But at the time, it just, like, fucking stopped you in your tracks. And, like, this just made me think of it. It's not a particularly good puzzle or anything. But, like, I just got really fixated on the dialogue. Because you're running around in the circle, and he'll, like, scream her name, and then she'll say something back. And I was like, it's got to have to do with, like, what door I'm walking in front of when her voice comes. And, like, I'm paying attention to that. And the real cue is this dripping water sound, which I just was hearing as ambience.
Yep.
And I probably would have thought of it if I didn't hyper-fixate on the voices.
Hey, you know what? Fucking exactly the same. I thought that it was supposed to be her voice getting louder when you were closer to it. Yeah. But in reality it is this water sound effect, which from what I can tell has no bearing on the game. Like, no point before where they, like, follow the water or something. Like, it's really stupid and comes out of nowhere. And the water does just sound like ambience. Like, there's nothing... I mean, it does get louder, so you have to, like, pay attention to that.
It was so obvious once I knew that I just thought that was interesting.
But then it also goes on for, like, 2 floors of, I think, 3 doors apiece. So you have to go through it 6 times. Like, The Lost Woods is The Lost Woods and is a classic because of... Well, one, it's, like, one of the first things that did it. It was this, like...
And they do it slightly differently each time.
Yeah.
In each game.
Well, okay, I wasn't even really considering The Lost Woods as a whole thing. I meant, like, The Lost Woods in The Legend of Zelda. Which, it does get a pass, because the thing that it's doing is...
it was new.
It was new, and it was, like, this hyper-liminal space. That's probably not the right use of that term. But the fact that it keeps coming up, and, like, you let some amateur game designers like Ubisoft Montreal at it. It just goes on forever, and, like, the cue is really not clear as to what you're supposed to do. It's dumb. I hated it. That's all I gotta say. This game has the balls to include a final boss. What do you think about this final boss?
I think it's less it had the balls to include the final boss, in that it felt obligated to put it in.
It feels like the final boss feels obligated to fight you at the end. Like, he's like, well, I guess.
It was... It's like one of the easiest final bosses of all time.
Yep. It was comical.
And it's really weird. It's just like cutscene, and then where it seems like it's setting up like another phase, like he's gonna turn into a big monster or something. And then it cuts back to gameplay, and then you just like hit him 4 more times, and he dies. And
unironically, my favorite part of combat in the whole game.
Yeah, it's like he gives a little speech where he's just like, oh, if you strike me down, I'll become even more powerful than you could possibly imagine, or something like that.
Yeah.
And then you just hit him.
Yeah.
And then he just dies.
It's like he's clearly winded from using his clone magic or whatever.
Yeah.
But he gives a threatening speech. Like, it feels like the writing...
He read the villain's handbook, and he knew that's what he was supposed to do.
He was following it to the letter for some reason. Jesus Christ. So first part, fucking who gives a shit? You jump over his head a bunch of times, smack his dumb, stupid brain.
You smack his balls around.
You smack his balls around for a while. You kill all 3 of his clones, and then eventually you can do like 1 attack on him, and then you kick him out the window. Which, first of all, this is like an old man. Like, he is a sorcerer, but he's also shown as being like frail and weak. And you fucking kick him out the window like it's a Tekken stage transition.
He doesn't even like use magic against you.
He just
makes clones.
He makes clones that are old people, man.
That fight you with a staff. And don't, like, shoot fireballs or anything.
And he didn't learn any of those good... He only learned political magic, apparently.
He only learned time magic, and he took the source of time, the rune of time manipulation.
Yeah, and so he is ruined now. And then, literally, though, I have no idea what they were going for. It is an enigma to me.
It literally feels like we have to do a boss... Because, like, this is the villain of the story. Like, we have to put in something.
If the intent was the second phase of the boss fight is just 3 hits and he dies, was like an intentional, like, look at how ridiculous it is that we put a final boss in this game. Fucking Perfect. 10 out of 10. I love it. If it was unintentional, I still love it. I still think it is amazing that it is like that. But it's confusing. It does because the game doesn't scream that it's making a commentary at this point. It's just a thing that happens straight-faced.
Yeah, to me, it feels like they just ran out of time. Like they weren't able to implement anything better.
He was going to turn into a big monster.
Yeah, and they couldn't cut it because it's the final boss.
Yep. The suits told us we had to keep the final boss in. It's like, he doesn't even have a health bar. You can kill him in 3 hits.
Yeah, that's what it feels like to me.
Mm-hmm. I had one other note. I don't know what you have left.
We're done. I'm done. Yeah.
All right. So my one other note is real stupid, which is why I saved it for the end, and also tradition. And it's the music.
Oh, the music.
The music in this game, really unremarkable for the most part. However, it is a uniquely 2003 thing that it is this, like, traditional, I'll say, like the we're in an Arabic country sitar music shit that like every Western fantasy thing plays in this scenario, but then just with an electric guitar over it. Like, it feels really cheesy. Like Halo meets Aladdin is like somehow the aesthetic that the music gives. And I found that charming in like a really stupid kind of way. But I think that is just aesthetically sort of my shit, is when something just feels horribly disparate and juxtaposed.
Yeah. I think I agree the music mostly underwhelming, but like the fusion of the guitar kind of worked for me.
I mean, it doesn't sound bad.
Yeah.
It just sounds weird.
Yeah, I did hear a little bit about the music, that apparently that like most of it is like authentic to like either Persia or India or, you know, whatever culture it's supposed to. And like the people like singing any like the choir chants are all like from the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is cool.
Yeah. So it's not like white people trying to make stuff that sounds ethnic.
Which is always a good sign.
Yeah.
That is good. That they had a little bit of authenticity to it. But then you do throw that guitar in there because it's a 2003
video game.
And it brings the whole thing together in the way that it feels more of a pastiche of like what it's actually going for. And I find it charming in a way, and so I just wanted to, that's what's going to be playing in the middle of this.
Yeah.
It's probably like the end credits song that has the real prevalent guitar that I find just very funny. So enjoy that, or you have enjoyed that. Let us know in the comments if you enjoyed it.
Shred a sweet guitar solo in the comments section.
Oh, God. All right. Do we have Farah thoughts?
My Farah thoughts. This is one of those games that, like, in a long line of games that I've always known about and have never played. I know, like, this game, I'd hesitate to call it, like, a classic. I feel like people who played it at the time seem to really like it, or at least anybody who's talking about it online. Seem to like hold this up and really like it. But I think the broader public moved on a long time ago. So it falls in kind of a middle ground. It's something everyone knows about, but not everyone's played, etc., etc. And so going back to it, like, those are sometimes the most interesting games to play, because, like, I can definitely see why. Like, I think if I played this at the time, I would have loved it. Like, it would have been right up my alley in, like, 2003. And I'd probably be sitting here, like, arguing with you about how it's great or whatever. But we're not in that timeline. So I think there is a lot of, like, forward-thinking design, like a lot of, like, thoughtfulness to, like, how they handled some stuff. I think I said it earlier. It's, like the perfect way to sum up my thoughts. Like, there's a lot of ideas in here that I think are ahead of their time, but are executed very of the time. So they've aged. They've not quite held up. Those context sensitive actions, I think, are a big one. Like trying to like run up a wall and accidentally running along it and stuff like that. Like trying to grab onto something and not doing it because you weren't close enough. Jumping over to hit that enemy instead of the one you wanted because the AI decided to jump to the wrong enemy that you didn't want. All those kinds of things, like the free camera control and then the restricted camera control, like switching back and forth. Classic old video game problems are definitely riddling this, but I don't know. I do like the like narrative action adventure, like Uncharted sort of thing, but applied to a different genre. Like I find that to be appealing. Like I know Ubisoft said they were going to remake this game, but it's been delayed like a million times and may or may not ever come out.
Yeah.
But that's like an interesting prospect to me, like a new shorter AAA game, narrative focus, but like with a different set of mechanics than shooting, like Uncharted. I think it was EA, I think, had announced like a Star Wars game like forever ago that was going to be like you played a bounty hunter and it was going to be like Uncharted, but like in the Star Wars universe, like more Han Solo bounty hunter, less Jango Fett.
Yeah.
Like a guy with a gun. And I was like, that sounds really cool. Like I like the idea of like big budget, shorter narrative experiences, and this game just made me think about that kind of stuff, and how I would like to see that make a little bit of a comeback. So I guess mixed feelings, leaning negative on a lot of stuff. Like I did enjoy my time with it to a certain extent. Like it's got some charm. And it was interesting. There's a lot of games I kept comparing it to in my head. Things like Uncharted and Assassin's Creed, like things that came after it that seemed like they definitely took influence from it. I just found that all that interesting. So I don't know. This is a mixed one.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of like that summary a bit. It is a game that makes you think about the past and the future of games and how we live in a time that is now pretty far removed from Prince of Persia, in its height of its relevance, where now a game can include a lot of the stuff that felt more unique in this game and do it in a better way. But this game does deserve at least a little bit of credit for popularizing it. I think that a lot of the platforming stuff in this game is actually really fun. I was making the comparison in my head to Mario in the sense that it's one of the few games where the platforming felt really free to me. Like, not necessarily that you had lots of options like you do in a Mario game, but it felt like you had the freedom to try stuff and that he would do the things that you told him to do. And it was clear that you could run along the walls and do lots of cool stuff. As things became more railroaded, I sort of started to drift away from that comparison. But it still felt fluid and fun to do. And then everything about this game, other than that, I think was bad. I mostly just got bored with a lot of it. The cutscenes really didn't do anything for me, and there weren't very many of them. I didn't engage with the story, both because I couldn't hear it, which is still funny to me, and also just because, like, I don't know, it felt kind of like something I'd seen before. And the combat sucks and is bad. I don't need to go any further into it. I already have. So, to me, like, I do like that there are things in this game that feel cool and feel Prince of Persia, but this game as a whole, I don't necessarily think is a great one to go back to. Maybe in a remake they might do something with it. I know that the franchise has been sort of lagging in recent years, but we'll maybe see something in the future that might be worth checking out. I don't know. That's where I'm at. Didn't like it. Thought it was cool in parts. Thank you for listening to No Clip this week.
What are we talking about next time?
Next time is Spooky Halloween. Did you hear the?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
heard the brr.
Hopefully that picks up. So
I'm assuming that's definitely in the track.
Yeah, Ghosts in the Machine for spooky Halloween. We're going to be talking about The Evil Within 2, which is a sequel to The Evil Within. And that's pretty much the amount I know about it. We get more into the actual mechanics and stuff of it then, but I do want to mention here as a bit of a programming note, that we ended the last Pocket episode by saying that our next episode was going to be on New Pokemon Snap. That episode is coming. It turns out not scary enough.
Yeah, a little bit of a scheduling error. We cannot fit it in before October.
Yeah, so instead we were going to be doing a Halloween Pocket episode. I believe what we've decided on so far is the shorter games by developer David Szymanski, which I'll update on the Discord and put in this video's description, so not to confuse people as much as I can.
Mm-hmm. So Pokemon Snap in November.
Yeah, November, new November. Pokemon Snap. Thanksgiving? I got nothing. So check that out then, and get ready for the spookiest Halloween season of your entire life.
Because we're gonna murder you.
Everyone who listens to this podcast will get a phone call.
Yeah, you'll die in 7
days. Until that time, which you don't have a lot left of it, so make sure you eat up all our good content. You can get a hold of us. All of our contact information is on our website at noclippodcast.com. There you can find links to our Discord, to the Twitter account, to our YouTube, and all of our old episodes, including ones on, we've mentioned Devil May Cry. I think Tamashi has a time-ish mechanic in it.
We mentioned Mario Sunshine a few times.
We did do that one.
I don't know.
Mario 3D World.
Shadow of the Colossus. You can climb on stuff. Sly Cooper,
Jak and Daxter.
Yeah.
If you got that PS2 itch, we've got the cure. We've got a topical ointment for your PS2 itch.
For your PS2 thumb. I feel like Sly Cooper 2 has a similar start screen, where it's like, it's like the balcony, and you hit start and it zooms in on it, and the guy's just there on it and you can move around. I think Sly 2 has like a direct reference to that, where like it starts the same way, like where you like hit start and you're like on a balcony or whatever.
The start screen is different in the PC
Oh,
version.
really?
Yeah, that's really funny.
Like only at the beginning.
Like the first time you boot it up. Okay,
it's like a shot of like the palace, and you hit start and like the camera pans and the prince is like on the balcony, and you just assume control.
That might have happened.
Yeah, it did. That's how the game starts.
Smash that like button. Anyway, we're back. I mean, now we're back.
Chad had to refuel his health by drinking that water. You should put in the sound effects, like the if you can find it.
I'm sure I can just
over top of you drinking the water.
That's usually where the music's fading out, though.
Yeah, but then you splice in the
all right. We'll see if we can make it work.